Welcome to Delightfully Dysfunctional, a podcast about navigating the emotions of the human condition and the challenges that come with it. I'm Kaylani Persian Mason, a psychotherapist and life coach with James Timmons, an ever-curious human. This is not a replacement for mental health therapy. Please seek out mental health care if that's what you're needing. This is an opportunity for self-healers to dive deep and understand more about themselves. Welcome back to Delightfully Dysfunctional. I'm Kaylani, and I'm here with James.
Hi, guys.
And today we get the very warm, fuzzy, light topic of childhood trauma. Yay!
Oh, that's not warm or fuzzy.
No, it's not. But I think it's a really important topic. We haven't dove into this in a while. I think it was like one we did in like our first 6 months of starting the podcast, and that's been a while.
Yeah. It comes up a lot also, just kind of organically.
We sprinkle it in.
Yeah, and it's just all over the place as far as mental health like stuff. Mm-hmm. I watched Inside Out 2 over this weekend.
Seen it yet.
Oh, it should be required viewing for mental health professionals. And yeah, they definitely do like this really great job of addressing not really necessarily childhood trauma. It's a little bit more lighthearted than that, but they just do a really good job like naming the emotions and stuff. So
yes, I love it. And that is really an adaptation of IFS, which we've talked about, internal family systems, and having different parts and kind of like the archetypes that we all hold. So I think that that's really fun, especially because it's been so long since the first one came out, and I've learned so much like on my own professionally and personally. So I'm sure that watching the second one, it'll be like with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned IFS, but today we're talking about a different modality. Is that what you would call it?
No, ACES is not a modality, but just stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So which there was a study. There's a study that was done by the CDC about childhood trauma and how it affects someone, not only biologically, how it affects your body.
Yeah.
How it affects you socially, the things that you may do differently as a protective factors, and also mental health conditions and chronic disease. So none of that sounds very warm and fuzzy. Oh, as well as, I mentioned social issues, but that includes addiction. So none of that sounds warm and fuzzy, but I think that it is a very important stepping stone in helping people understand themselves, be more compassionate towards themselves, and take more control of their life instead of feeling as though they are a victim to their circumstances, or just feel like they can gaslight themselves. That's what I really notice. In fact, that's kind of the theme that I want to hold true to in this episode, is that I talked to so many people and had conversations even today with clients before I got here where I hear the trauma going on in their childhood, and when I reflect that to them, they quickly deny it. Other people have it worse. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really interesting. Like, we can be self-gaslighting, and that really stops and doesn't allow us to understand the impact of what childhood trauma had on us. And that's what I want to highlight today.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I have heard like like my parents' generation, they often say things like, "Oh, you guys turned out fine." We got beat when we were kids and we turned out fine. That kind of stuff, and it's like, it's up for debate.
Right. And you look again at like the top illnesses that are, especially in the United States, they are very much stress related.
Yeah.
And have to do with chronic stress. And I think childhood trauma, I know that's what we're about to talk about. Childhood trauma affects our chronic stress and the way that our nervous system adapts and reacts to the stressors in our life, and the protective factors that we put into place that can really cause dysfunction and escape through addiction, because it is so emotionally painful. Yeah. So some of the gaslighting thoughts I'd already mentioned, but it's this sense of, it wasn't that bad, just really minimizing our experience, or I'm just being too sensitive. Other people have had it worse than me. I should be over this by now. I'm just making excuses for my own behavior. I deserve what happened to me. I'm overreacting. I should just move on, forget about it. I'm weak for letting this affect me. And I want to start out our episode in mentioning those because I want to check in with anyone who's listening and just let them self-reflect if those are things you might have said to yourself as we move forward and identifying what those traumas are.
Yeah.
So let's read through some of the qualifying questions to determine if someone has had if someone has had trauma or ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, potato, it's the same thing. But the study did have to select specific, they had to narrow down that criteria. And I also want to talk about additional traumas that are a part of that as well, that weren't specifically identified. So, did a parent or other adult in the household very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or make you afraid that you might be physically hurt? That's one factor. The second one is, did a parent or adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you inappropriately or touch your body in any kind of sexual way or force an act upon you or with you? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought that you were important or special? Did your family not look out for one another or feel close to one another or support each other? I want to pause on this one a little bit because I think this is an actual, very common one. And that gaslighting thought could be, I had a roof over my head. I was fed. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And emotional support, emotional stability of the home is an important factor that I do think for past generations, like you were saying, can minimize because there was such a survival that was different than what we experience now.
Yeah. It's crazy because, just how that's a good term to that we gaslight ourselves, and minimize the experience. But it's no, but you are kind of running away from the effects of you're sort of you're minimizing the actual true effects of that trauma that you experienced. So don't do that. We need to address it and really look at it in reality because, people do have, in my opinion, I was just watching a documentary about Abraham Lincoln right before this, ironically. And, his whole thing was, basically all humans are created equal and we all have unalienable rights. And so humans have human rights. So if you are treated as less than what you're worth, and so if you were abused or traumatized as a child, that is being treated as less than what you were worth. And so, it's so toxic to tell somebody who is treated as less than you were fine,
And most of the time, those are things we wouldn't tell other people.
Right.
Sometimes it does happen. There can be a lot of judgment and criticism,
Yeah.
but it's very the self-critical and the lack of compassionate wording and understanding that we give ourselves is really a piece that we should pay attention to.
Yeah.
And often I see that harsh judgment for ourselves is reflected in harsh judgment towards others. Are you constantly irritable? Are you uneasy?
Yeah.
Do you struggle with trusting other people? And I also want to know, what is your relationship like with yourself and the things that you're saying to you around, especially these most tender and painful areas like childhood trauma? Or would you say that to a child?
No.
Would you picture, if you pictured a child in your life who you care about going through what you went through when you were little, does that hit differently?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Especially having kids and being wanting to protect them from awful thoughts and evil things that they could be told, criticisms or whatever. And but the harshest critic usually is yourself. And so, but it's always kind of a returning back to that objective place of your true worth. And so me personally, I'm usually beating myself up more than anyone else, and I'm not staying in that objective place of my self-worth. Right. So then it's kind of like, okay, well, most likely the reason I'm beating myself up so much is because that's my way that I've always survived. So like, where's that coming from? Yeah.
Start asking yourself more questions. Why am I that way?
Yeah.
And why? Where did that come from?
And most likely it brings us back to ACEs.
Right. And I'm not saying that we should be a victim and wallow and say, oh, because daddy didn't do this or that. No. But there needs to be an acknowledgement. There needs to be a grief for what you didn't have so that you can then build a foundation that is unencumbered by your trauma and filtering the world through your trauma.
Right.
Then you're not getting a valid experience if you're always having that guard up. And you deserve to have a beautiful experience in this life.
Yeah.
Something that we're all capable of.
Absolutely.
So we'll continue on with some of these ACEs questions. Did you ever very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Were your parents too drunk or high to take care of you or to take you to the doctor if you needed it? Were your parents ever divorced or separated? Was your parent or caregiver often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or some other way thrown? Was there, physical violence that you were witness to? Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or used street drugs? Or addicted, to opioids and even prescription drugs? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill? Or did a household member attempt suicide? And did a household member go to prison? Mm. Now, additional factors that the ACEs questionnaire wasn't able to fit in, just because all studies have limitations, would be exposure to violence that it was outside of the home, not just inside the home. Natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, that can be very traumatic. Chronic poverty, living with food insecurity and unstable housing, or not having access to health care. Really repeated and toxic bullying situations, that can be a huge factor as well. Foster care and adoption, again, just multiple placements in the home and not a strong attachment to any one caregiver. Immigration and refugee trauma, alienation from a parent, chronic illness from either someone in particular or a family member, and other medical trauma that can come from that because procedures can be really invasive and scary. Mm. A parent who is really gaslighting you and being psychologically manipulative, or it was already discussed, but abusing drugs, addictive behaviors outside of that too, like gambling.
Yeah.
Racism and discrimination, and exposure to war or terrorism. And I think it's often more of those bigger things like exposure to war or terrorism that we think of when we think of trauma. And it is more than that. And so I wanted to highlight all of those things and let people try to understand a little bit more of themselves.
Yeah. Well, and it's one thing to look at a kid who's living in war-torn Eastern Europe or something. You definitely don't have as much trauma as that kid, most likely. But then also don't minimize the actual trauma that you have experienced. One thing that I've heard from many people in my world is manipulative parents, almost like narcissist parenting. That's way more common than I think that we realize. Especially us grown-ups, people in our generation grew up with narcissistic parents, and they have to sort of dismantle that whole worldview to then realize, oh gosh, I was manipulated.
Right. I've been people pleasing my way through life, and I haven't really even thought about what I need or what I want, what's healthy for me. Yeah. And those are layers as well. And there are different levels of resiliency through trauma too. Yeah. And a huge factor, we can identify these factors. There's research and data out there. A huge piece of it is how many loving, caring, supportive adults are in your life. Yeah. So someone could have gone through very high trauma, have a high ACEs score, But perhaps they also have really amazing teachers and coaches and other support people in their life.
Yeah.
That help them know and see that they are valued and loved and cared for and worthy. But all of these factors, if we're not given those reminders and those stable, steady attachments to people that are really our cheerleaders,
Yeah.
it's easy to then form those core hurts of I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable,
Yeah.
I'm not enough, no one wants me. And then that's the way that we might operate in the world.
Yeah.
Only seeking out and feeling familiar within, let's say, relationships that are unhealthy and toxic. You know, telling ourselves, well, just because they haven't cheated on me, so this is the healthiest relationship. But then there's, you know, manipulation galore.
Yeah.
Or it's just a different kind of, it's almost like a computer software that's downloaded when you're young, because your brain is still forming and you have a malleable brain with a lot of neuroplasticity. When you're young, your brain isn't fully formed until you're 25. So it's like, oh, it's got a bad software update. And if you're operating in the world with that, you're going to glitch.
Yeah.
Not only, so the outcome of the ACES study was, like I'd mentioned a little bit, but you're going to glitch in the way of, my nervous system isn't able to regulate in these times when I feel really overwhelmed. And so I turn to alcohol.
Yeah.
Or drugs. Or gambling. Or fill in the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
My nervous system isn't able to regulate. And so I find myself just falling into toxic patterns and anxiety and depression and feeling lost and out of control. I don't know how to manage my emotions. I don't know how to regulate my emotions. There was no adult around to help me do so.
You kind of like navigate life on accident and like almost like, you know, grope in the darkness, you know, to find your place. But yeah, I was just thinking, it's really crazy how like just the power of love, how it can kind of abound like overcome all that stuff, because like somebody could go through like a lot of ugliness, and it's like a lot of times all it takes is one person to kind of like see your value and love you well, and then you learn who you are through that, and you kind of overcome all the ugliness. Like I was watching Abraham Lincoln documentary, so you're gonna hear a lot of that worldview.
I'm gonna learn about Abe. This is fun. You're teaching me. Teach me about Abe.
Well, Frederick Douglass, for example, you know, he was actually, when he was a boy, he was a slave, but he was his slave owner was a woman, and she didn't know that you weren't supposed to educate the slaves, so she would read to him and stuff, and she like loved him, but yeah, and then he became like, she gave him such a gift. He eventually escapes, and then is just like a really notable, you know, African American historical figure who like rose above all that ugliness. Mm-hmm. And then also Abraham Lincoln, his mom died when he was little, and his dad was like really negligent. His dad would leave for months at a time to go look for like his, you know, replacement mom, and he found Abraham Lincoln's stepmom, who was actually a really great stepmom, and she didn't know how to read, but she had like a wealth of like great books, and she loved Abraham well, and like he would read all her books. And so like those couple of examples that are fresh in my mind are really great examples of like, through ugliness, love can abound.
Yeah.
You know?
And trauma is a fact of life. It's not something that can always be avoided, like the death of a parent.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
We can't always avoid that. And trauma is hardship. We can't avoid that. And even though, like, as a parent, I want to protect my little one, I also have an understanding that whatever hardships she goes through are also opportunities for beautiful blessings and lessons.
Yeah.
And it would be far more concerning for her to not have any. That has its own hardship.
Yeah.
You know, the parents who are helicoptering and trying to avoid their child having any kind of disappointment, or catering to them in a way that's actually really unhealthy, like honey, what do you want for dinner? Letting them have all the choice, because that isn't preparing them for the real world. And that's a real pain, because the world doesn't revolve around you.
Right.
That isn't how it works. It's a delicate balance, though, because trauma is a fact of life, but it does not have to be a life sentence. And that's a quote from Bessel van der Kolk, actually, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh.
And that we just really, the piece that we need to heal from is more so that messaging that we're telling ourselves. That's the real suffering that trauma has, is that gaslighting, it wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's me. I'm weak. My character is weak. And that isn't the case. Although we might need to find a level of perseverance to work through that pain and trauma, you can live a vibrant, happy, beautiful life, even having had terrible trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the human resilience is so underrated also. And like that, there is a lot to be said about people overcoming like ugliness. But then, like you said, but it's one thing to overcome it. It's another thing to run away from it and poo-poo it, because you're not overcoming it that way.
And trying to escape from pain just creates more pain.
Right. Yeah. Would you say that the best way to overcome trauma is to directly address it?
Actually, no.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think it's a case-by-case thing. I think most people don't have the emotional regulation to do that. And so if someone divulges that they have a lot of trauma, it's not the first area that I go to. First, we need to develop a relationship. And that's really like the beauty of therapy. What I offer is a safe, healing, healthy relationship with someone who's non-judgmental. And like the phrasing that they use in therapy is unconditional positive regard. And I just feel like that is a very clinical way of saying love.
I was literally going to say, because everything you're describing is that theory in my brain of like love overcomes. Like everyone,
I just get to love people all day. Isn't that beautiful?
You're a
get to
professional lover.
Yeah.
You love professionally.
I'm a professional lover.
Sorry,
oh dear.
I didn't want to use the word lover. You
hilarious.
Love professionally. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Sure.
And but because like most people, a lot of people that come into your office probably don't have somebody who can love well, right? So then they come to you and you're like, I'm going to enter like this vehicle of love to help you navigate through the darkness.
They don't have people who can sit through their pain.
Yeah.
They have people who get uncomfortable by it and minimize it. And I'm like, no, tell me. Let me sit with it. Let me feel with you.
Right.
In fact, I mean, this could be, there could be debate, but I just, especially since having a child, I can't always hold it back. Like I'll cry with my clients.
Yeah.
Like I let them know that,
with that,
like, what you're telling me is affecting me because I can feel your pain, and I know I feel it.
Yeah.
Let me feel that with you. Let me like show you that it isn't small and insignificant.
Yeah.
And there's so much beauty. And I have like, here's this technique and here's that one and here's like, let's talk about your dysfunctional thoughts and let's like practice this breathing technique and all these tools. But the vessel for why therapy works is like the strength of the relationship with your therapist. And that's why I think it's so important to find someone that is the right fit for you. Right. And there are therapists who aren't. And I also think that you can only help your clients as far as you're willing to go. Like I've looked at those areas. I continue to. I seek them out. I want to learn how to keep addressing things that come up for me in my trauma better and better and better. Yeah. And I can tell that is also the way that I am able to help and connect with my clients better too.
Yeah.
So all of this, trauma being a part of our life does not have to mean that it's something that can't be recovered from. And I'll also say that I don't know if there's anyone, you don't escape this life without trauma.
Yeah. Trauma usually has like some beautiful lessons on the other side. Mm-hmm. I mean, and, I don't like when people I care about go through trauma. And and the worst thing is, as a parent, I've created trauma for my kids, and that's something that I have to live with. But
But you also get the opportunity, and you've cultivated yourself in a way that when they're ready to talk about it, I think that you'll be able to sit with their pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's a real gift. That's something that I have loving, caring adults, but they don't know how to do that well.
Yeah.
When I think about little Kaylani, and it still is an area that is hard for us to communicate through.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to parenting, it's so much about doing this work of reparenting yourself and understanding the layers that were not meant for you and how that may trickle down to your children.
Totally.
And doing the work of feeling your way through it and addressing it and creating more self-awareness so that you don't have those blind spots.
That's such a great point because, the reparenting for me happened after the trauma when I was like kind of forced. So now it's kind of like, okay, now, I mean, the damage is done, but now I feel like a leveled up person that can then be a better father for you, even though I'm less around. But you're a healthier version of yourself.
Yeah. And that's a gift.
Yeah. Definitely.
And there's this parable in a book I read recently. It's called A Dose of Hope, which is a great book for anyone who wants to explore or understand MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. But the parable was about you walk up to a man and his dog, and the dog is whining. And they say, "Why is your dog whining?"
Mm-hmm.
And the man says, "He's sitting on a nail. He'll move when it's painful enough for him to move." And that's our trauma. When our trauma is painful enough, we will be forced to make a decision to move through it, to feel through it, to process it, to change our circumstances, to change the way that we've been doing things, to adopt new habits, to say goodbye to old ones, even if that's been the crutch that we feel has kept us going. Yeah. It's really the thing holding us back. And that takes reflection. That takes not sleepwalking through life and having self-awareness. So how do we cultivate self-awareness? Journaling is my favorite way.
Yeah.
Journaling is my favorite way. Just like, how am I feeling? And where did that come from? Why does this feeling feel familiar? Thinking back into other times in your life when you're having especially a strong emotion or a negative emotion, like, oh, why is this so all-consuming? Mm-hmm. What is it about it? And typically those questions are going to lead you back on this little breadcrumb trail to that core hurt and help you understand.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to someone recently, and they, I'm trying to think of a way I'm going to tweak this story, but they decided I need, like someone in their life had been really harsh to them and said, you need to stick with things, and really shamed them for not sticking with something, not persevering through something. And they really took that and harshly applied it to every area of their life, that they can't quit, that you need to stick through it.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you build up walls and make these harsh rules, it eliminates the ability to have discernment. Mm-hmm. And discernment is important because that is not an approach that applies to everything. Do you just stick it out in a relationship that is toxic and abusive and painful and makes you a worse person or an angry person?
Yeah.
Do you just stick it out when it's a job that is soul-sucking and there are other opportunities available? Like, how long will it be that you sit on that nail before it's painful enough to move?
Yeah. And a lot of times in those situations, a lot of people will have that same like false noble thought of, I mean, it is noble in a lot of situations to kind of stick it out, don't give up early, but then a lot of people will stay longer than they should have, and they'll look back and go, I should have left when I felt it was like I was ready to leave, you know?
Right. Yeah. You're not able to navigate your own path based on not only what is like best for you, not in a selfish way, but typically when I say best for you, it's not out of a place of ego. It's of like you being a kinder, more aligned, gentle human who can be more loving,
right?
Being the best, most loving version of yourself. That's a gift for everyone around you. So it's not selfish.
Right.
And I part of this too, like this practice of self-compassion, I think a lot of people, especially of older generations, can feel like self-compassion, like you're going to go soft and like that's selfish, or that's a frivolous thing. Yeah. And self-compassion and accountability are major pieces that I think need to go hand in hand. No, you still own, and you should own when there is something that you need to clean up.
Yep. Yeah.
And you can have an explanation for, I'm so sorry. I did that from a very painful place, and that's an explanation but not an excuse. I should have done differently.
Right.
I want to do differently. Let me show you that I can do differently. How can I make this up to you? But if you aren't healing your shit and you don't know what is keeping you on this perpetual cycle, then there's no way to do differently. And that's why a lot of times people might say, I keep trying, but I keep falling off the wagon. Like we're not figuring out what it is at the core that's so painful that one is falling back into addiction. Yeah.
I mean, and I feel like a lot of people are afraid to kind of be really honest with themselves. And so they overlook a lot of like realities, and because it's one thing to, because self-compassion in my mind just means stop beating yourself up, and because it's not self-awareness if you're really harsh on yourself either. That's too far, it's definitely good to have accountability and say like, the mess that I'm in, I put myself in, like, that's reality. That's real. But if you were to say, I put myself in this mess, now I need to punish myself for the next 5 years.
I'm such an idiot. I'm always going to mess up.
Right.
That's not, I don't deserve good things. That's not the same thing.
Exactly. And that's not showing yourself compassion. No. So if you show yourself compassion, say, look, I had the information that I had. I did the best that I with the information I had. So now that I have more information, I'm going to do my best, something like that.
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of people, if they're coming into session with a lot of trauma, we might actually start with just some mindfulness and grounding techniques so that they can get to a point of actually talking through things and having practiced some of those techniques so that we can reprocess what's going on, or just start with sharing what is it right now happening in your life.
Yeah.
And as we build that therapeutic relationship, as they build that trust with me, then they can feel more and more comfort in the safety of sharing more and of getting someone else to reflect back to them that like, you didn't deserve that.
Right. And then hearing it back is almost like a revalidation of like, that's accurate. Hearing it back is accurate, or it validates the accuracy.
Especially because most of the time when something traumatic happens, it's not like the trauma itself is painful, but it's when we try to go to someone and share it and have support, and it is like gasoline is thrown on the wound. And then it's like, oh, I will never, that sense of vulnerability. It was already so painful. And then it was just like disqualified.
I hate when people do that. Yeah, it's such a harmful thing to do.
Right. And so to be able to create opportunities for someone to just really feel seen and loved through whatever they're processing, it's a real honor. I feel very special.
Yeah, you are very special. And I mean it. Yeah.
So having a really good therapist to work with is another way that you can overcome that. And having support groups and group work, I think, is actually really, it's wonderful. I want to keep doing more and more of that, actually, because I mean, even we've talked a little bit, even this community that we've created is a form of group work.
Yeah.
As people are sharing and they're saying, me too.
Yeah.
I went through that too.
It's really cool when we get to see, when people feel compelled to like be vulnerable and share with us. And then it's like a lot of people, we've heard from several people that like have just put themselves in a really like isolated place, and we're like the only people that they reach out to, which is like such an honor, but it's also heartbreaking, you know?
It is. And I feel, I want to say too, I wish that I could respond to every single message.
Yeah.
We've been traveling and I have a full therapy practice on top of what we do here.
Yeah.
And I love my family time. But I do want to say I do read the messages, and they really do, they move us. I know that you read them as well, and we'll talk about them, and just like, I don't know, I'm like, oh, I'm sending that person some love right now, some care, because I love humans and I love our ability to heal and our ability to have compassion for one another.
Yeah.
And even in those dark places where you don't feel that or you haven't found that, if you're a human, then you're capable.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So thanks for hanging out and talking with me about trauma, James.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorite topics.
Me too, but I feel like you got to trick people into talking about it.
Yeah. This was a good one.
Oh, yes. And please join us for some of our other therapist reactions that we've been doing for music videos and sometimes little movie clips. Actually, I'd love some more suggestions for other
I have a
powerful
suggestion.
movie clips.
You got to watch Inside Out too.
Inside Out too. Okay.
Yeah.
It's on my homework list. I'll do it. I'll report back.
You can take Priya.
I don't know. Do you think she can sit through it? She's 3.
It's really like lots of bright colors. And my 5-year-old watched it and he sat through it. Just get her
3 and 5 is different.
Get her popcorn and some soda and, candy, and she'll be fine.
She'll be fine.
Yeah.
She could start screaming through the aisles too. We'll
okay.
see. I'll try.
If she does, have Zach take her out because you're required to watch it.
It's required.
Yeah.
Required watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you'll see.
All right. I've been assigned my homework. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Delightfully Dysfunctional. Please like, subscribe, check out our YouTube, and share it with someone that you know who might need to hear some of the wisdom, the love, the understanding that we're trying to provide to everyone. So thank you so much. It means the world, and we'll see you in the next one.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.